V2 rocket. The British government told the public that the mysterious explosions were caused by faulty gas mains. The public did not believe it. They started calling them flying gas pipes and kept dying. The V2 was the world's first ballistic missile, a rocket that climbed into the upper atmosphere and fell back down onto its target. It descended at approximately 3,580 miles per hour. That is 4 times the speed of sound. It arrived before the sound of its own approach. There were no sirens. The first sign that a V2 had been fired was the crater it left. It was developed by Werner von Braun at a weapons research facility on the German coast and first used against London on September 8, 1944. The missile was 46 feet long, burned alcohol and liquid oxygen, and could carry a 1-ton warhead 200 miles. There was no practical defense. It could not be intercepted. Its mobile launch platforms were nearly impossible to locate and destroy from the air. Its trajectory was beyond the reach of anti-aircraft guns. More than 3,000 were launched in combat. Over 1,100 struck Britain, killing approximately 2,754 civilians, and TORP received over 1,600 hits. On June 20th, 1944, during a test flight, a V2 became the first man-made object to reach space. The same rocket design that killed thousands of civilians in London and Antwerp became the direct ancestor of the rockets that carried humans to the moon. The rocket put humans on another world, in more than one way. MG-42. The US Army made a training film specifically to convince soldiers that the most terrifying sound on the Western Front was not actually going to kill them. It had mixed results. The MG-42 fired at 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute. That is 2 to 3 times faster than any equivalent Allied machine gun. At that speed, individual shots became indistinguishable. What soldiers heard was a single sustained tear, like cloth ripping at high speed. Allied troops called it Hitler's buzzsaw. The Soviets called it the linoleum ripper. The Germans called it the bone saw. One American officer described it in 3 words. It sounded like a zipper. The weapon weighed 25 pounds, had an effective range of 2,300 feet, and ran from ammunition belts holding up to 250 rounds. Its barrel needed changing every 150 to 200 rounds of sustained fire. A trained 2-man crew could swap it in under 10 seconds. Over 420,000 were produced. What made it tactically different was the German doctrine built around it. Most armies put the rifle at the center and supported it with machine guns. German squads did the opposite. The MG-42 gunner was the primary combatant. Riflemen existed to protect and resupply him. Every defensive position was organized around the weapon's field of fire. When Allied infantry hit an MG-42 position, their options were to wait for a barrel change, wait for ammunition to run out, or call for a tank. The gun outlasted the war, the regime, and everyone who was afraid of it. Tiger I. The Tiger I produced a specific kind of panic in Allied tank crews that commanders eventually gave it a name. They called it Tiger phobia, the instinct to stop, call for artillery, and wait rather than engage a Tiger directly. The Tiger I entered service in 1942 at 57 tons, heavier than anything the Allies fielded. Its frontal armor was 100 millimeters thick, which meant virtually every Allied anti-tank weapon in standard use bounced off it at normal combat ranges. Its 88mm gun could destroy a Sherman tank at over 1,000 yards, well beyond the range at which a Sherman could effectively fire back. In practical terms, a Tiger destroyed before it could be destroyed. Kill ratios documented in Tiger engagements range from 10 to 1 to over 19 to 1 against opposing armor. At Villers-Bocage on June 13, 1944, one German tank commander destroyed approximately 14 tanks and 15 armored vehicles in minutes, halting a British armored advance alone. The Tiger had real weaknesses. It was mechanically unreliable, burned fuel at extraordinary rates, and was too heavy for most European bridges. Germany built only 1,347 Tiger in across the entire war. The Allies produced nearly 50,000 Shermans in the same period. A Sherman had roughly a 1 in 5 chance of destroying a Tiger in a direct frontal engagement. The standard solution was to send 5 Shermans and accept the losses. U-boat. Winston Churchill survived the Blitz without losing sleep. The U-boats were different. He wrote afterward that they were the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. Britain is an island. Everything is needed to survive. Food, fuel, ammunition, equipment. Cross the Atlantic by ship. Admiral Karl Donitz calculated that if his submarines could sink ships faster than Allied shipyards could replace them, Britain would be strangled into submission without a single German soldier reaching English soil. He nearly proved it. Donitz developed Wolfpack tactics. U-boats spread across the Atlantic in patrol lines. When one located a convoy, it radioed the positions of the rest. The pack converged, surfaced at night to avoid radar, and struck from multiple directions simultaneously. Escort ships could not respond to attacks coming from everywhere at once. During the period German submarines called the Happy Time, from mid-1940 to early 1941, each U-boat at sea sank an average of 8 merchant ships per month. By the end of the war, U-boats had sunk approximately 2,825 merchant ships and 175 warships. Over 30,000 Allied merchant sailors died crossing the Atlantic. The tide broke in May 1943, Black May in the U-boat logs, when Allied code-breaking, long-range aircraft, and improved escort tactics combined to destroy 41 submarines in a single month. Donitz withdrew his fleet. Of the roughly 40,000 men who served in the U-boat arm, 28,000 lost their lives. 3 out of 4 did not come home. The weapon that nearly starved Britain proved hungrier for its own crews than for its targets. Stuka dive bomber. The Stuka did not just drop bombs, it announced itself first. The Junkers Ju-87, Germany's most feared dive bomber, was fitted with sirens mounted on its landing wheels that built to a shriek as the aircraft plunged toward its target at nearly 400 miles per hour. The sound was deliberate. It was psychological engineering. A French general reported that on hearing the wail, his artillery crews abandoned their guns and his infantrymen cowered in the trenches before a single bomb had landed. The bombs broke buildings. The sirens broke people. First tested in Spain during the Civil War, the Stuka became the leading edge of Germany's blitzkrieg. It divided ahead of tank columns to destroy bridges, gun positions, and troop formations with an accuracy that high-altitude bombing could never match. In Poland in 1939, it created panic on a national scale. In France in 1940, it helped collapse a defense that outnumbered the Germans on paper. On a single day in July 1940, Stuka sank 4 British destroyers off the English coast. Then the Battle of Britain exposed its fatal flaw. Slow and poorly armed, it had no defense against organized fighter opposition. The RAF massacred it. The Luftwaffe lost nearly 60 in August 1940 alone and withdrew it from the British campaign entirely. The plane that conquered Europe was undone by the first enemy that could actually shoot back. V-1 flying bomb. Londoners learned to pray that the buzzing sound would continue, because the moment it stopped, someone was already dead. Germany's V-1 was the world's first mass-produced cruise missile, a pilotless flying bomb launched from ramps along the French and Dutch coasts beginning June 13, 1944. Each carried an 1,870-pound warhead, flew at around 400 miles per hour at 3,000 feet, and was guided by nothing more than a preset compass and a small counter on its nose that measured the distance flown. When the counter hit its target number, the engine cut, the nose dipped. The dive began. There was no pilot. No recall. At peak intensity, over 100 struck Britain in a single day. Of approximately 6,725 launched against Britain, 2,419 reached London, killing 6,184 people and injuring nearly 18,000. British fighter pilots discovered they could slide a wingtip beneath a V-1's wing and flip it off course without triggering the warhead. MI5 ran a deception campaign through double agents, feeding false impact coordinates to German controllers who adjusted their aim, pushing the bomb short of central London and into the suburbs instead. Less than a square mile of central London was protected. Croydon paid the difference. Germany launched nearly 10,000 V-1s to kill around 6,000 people. More than 20,000 slave laborers died building them at a concentration camp called Mittelbau-Dora. The V-1 was more deadly to the people who built it than the people it was aimed at. T-34. German soldiers had a nickname for what happened when their shells hit a Soviet T-34. They called it knocking on the door, because knocking was all the shells could do. The T-34 arrived on the Eastern Front in June 1941 and immediately made most of Germany's anti-tank weapons useless. The standard German 37mm anti-tank gun bounced off its hull. In one documented incident, a single T-34 absorbed more than 30 direct hits from an entire battalion of German anti-tank guns, drove back to its own lines, and was repaired and returned to combat. The reason was geometry. Earlier tanks used flat vertical armor plates. The T-34's armor was angled at 60 degrees. A shell that should have punched through 45mm of steel now had to travel through the equivalent of over 90mm, and was likely to skip off entirely. It also carried a gun that outranged the main German tank of 1941. Its diesel engine reduced the risk of fire. Its wide tracks moved through mud and snow where German tanks got stuck. The T-34 was the greatest shock the German army received in the entire war. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of Germany's Blitzkrieg, described the T-34's superiority as vast. Germany's response was to study captured T-34s and use their sloped armor and track design as the blueprints for the Panther, a better tank, built to answer a tank that had already changed the war. The T-34 won because Germany never had enough of an answer, and the Soviets built 57,000 of them. Kamikaze. Japan looked at its remaining pilots, its remaining planes, and its remaining options, and concluded that the most efficient use of all three was to make them one way. A plane with enough fuel to reach the target, but not enough to come back, was not a flaw in the plan. It was the plan. By 1944, Japanese pilots lacked the training to consistently deliver bombs accurately in conventional attacks. A human being guiding an aircraft directly into a ship was simply more accurate than a bomb dropped from altitude. Japan launched its first organized kamikaze operations on October 25, 1944, at Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. The first major warship sunk by kamikaze, USS St. Lo, went down within hours of the campaign beginning. At Okinawa in the spring of 1945, Japan sent massed waves of hundreds of aircraft in coordinated attacks. Kamikaze strikes at Okinawa sank or put out of action at least 30 US warships, killed approximately 5,000 sailors, and wounded 5,000 more. It was the single greatest personnel loss the US Navy suffered in any battle of the entire war. In total, around 2,800 kamikaze pilots died. They sank approximately 47 ships and damaged roughly 300. No aircraft carrier, battleship, or cruiser was sunk. The largest ships proved too survivable. Across the entire campaign, roughly 14 to 18% of kamikaze strikes hit their target. 86% of pilots died without striking a ship. US military planners estimated an invasion of the Japanese home islands would face up to 10,000 kamikaze aircraft. That estimate was among the factors considered when the decision was made to use the atomic bomb instead. 4,000 men died to delay an outcome that was already decided. B-29 Superfortress. The B-29 Superfortress killed more people than the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb became history. The B-29 was forgotten. The Boeing B-29 was the most advanced bomber in the world when it entered service in 1944. Its total development cost was approximately $3 billion, more than the entire Manhattan Project. It was built for one purpose: to reach Japan from the Pacific Islands the US had just captured, 1,500 miles away, at altitudes where Japanese air defenses could not reliably intercept it. High-altitude precision bombing failed. Wind currents at 30,000 feet scattered bombs across miles. General Curtis LeMay changed tactics in early 1945. He stripped the aircraft of most defensive guns to save weight, loaded them with napalm, and sent them in low over Japan's cities at night. On the nights of March 9th to 10th, 1945, 334 B-29s firebombed Tokyo. The resulting firestorm killed an estimated 100,000 people, destroyed 267,000 buildings, and left 1 million people homeless in a single night. It was the deadliest air raid in history. Over the following months, LeMay's campaign systematically destroyed 67 Japanese cities. By the time Japan surrendered, half of Tokyo was rubble. The atomic bomb got the headline. The B-29 did most of the killing. Atomic bomb. At 8:15 in the morning on August 6, 1945, less than 2 pounds of uranium caused an explosion above Hiroshima, equal to 15,000 tons of TNT. The age of conventional warfare ended that same night. Ground temperatures reached approximately 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit within a fraction of a second. Everything within a mile of the explosion ceased to exist. An estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people died instantly. The shockwave leveled nearly every structure. The scorched outlines of people were burned into stones. By the end of 1945, the death toll had surpassed 100,000. 3 days later, a second bomb, more powerful, using plutonium instead of uranium, detonated over Nagasaki. An estimated 40,000 died instantly. At least 30,000 more followed by the year's end. The surrounding hills absorbed much of the blast. Nagasaki was, in a sense, lucky in its geography. Japan announced its surrender on August 15th. The formal documents were signed on September 2nd. The survivors, known in Japan as hibakusha, meaning explosion-affected people, lived with elevated rates of leukemia, thyroid cancer, and other radiation-linked illnesses for the rest of their lives. Many of their children and grandchildren still carry measurable genetic consequences. The last surviving hibakusha are in their 90s now. The atomic bomb killed roughly 200,000 people across 2 cities. The weapons currently held by the world's 9 nuclear states could kill every human being on Earth several times over. The bomb didn't end the war, but it made the next one unthinkable.